everyone, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. I'm going to be talking about my favorite things to ferment. Now, I've done a video on this several years back. It was 5 years ago. I was looking, I'm like, okay, that was 5 years ago. That's a big enough time span. And there's at least been one change since I did that, if not a couple. And why not cover this again? So before I get into the items, I am not a person who likes to ferment everything. Some people like to do that. Totally fine. There are some things I really, really love fermented. Patrick doesn't really like anything fermented except for maybe an occasional glass of my homemade wine. That's about it. There are a few things that he eats that have been fermented that he might not even realize, but I don't think he would care. As long as it doesn't taste like certain fermented foods, he'd be fine with it. I think he likes sauerkraut, but I don't make sauerkraut. I don't know why I've never made sauerkraut. Well, no, I know why. It's because every time I think of making sauerkraut, I'm like, I'm just going to make kimchi. It's basically a Korean sauerkraut because it's typically made with cabbage, but kimchi can be made with all kinds of different vegetables. So I would say, I'm not going to say what's at the top of my list, but that is one of the things it was one of the very first things. In fact, I think it was the very first thing I started fermenting because I'd never had kimchi. I really wanted to try it, and I decided I was going to learn how to do it and just make it myself and then try it, and immediately fell in love with it, as did my oldest son, who was only like 6 or 7 at the time. He loves kimchi. And it's the main difference is that sauerkraut is basically just fermented cabbage, where with kimchi, you've got your cabbage. A lot of times, the more traditional way, they might use Napa cabbage, also known as Chinese cabbage, bok choy, and mix the two. When I first started doing it, I liked using both. I loved the really crunchy ends of the bok choy in there. And I like to add carrots to that usually. And then ginger, green onions, garlic, and fish sauce is also commonly used, and I always forget to add it. It does add a nice flavor. It's actually from anchovies, so it is clean. To me, it's just sauerkraut that's a step up. Kimchi is, of course, one of the many things I like to ferment, but one of my other favorite ways to make kimchi is with cucumbers, especially fresh cucumbers from the garden. Cucumber kimchi is, maybe you don't like cabbage kimchi, but you might really like cucumber kimchi. You're still going to have some of those same flavors, the ginger, the garlic, the onion, etc., the spices, because you got to put some hot spices in there. That's the whole idea. It's got to be hot. I've also made floral kimchis. I'll do this from time to time. One of the best flowers to make kimchi with is let's say you don't have any cabbage, or cabbage doesn't grow as well for you as maybe nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are great because they already have that kind of radishy flavor. Oh, because radish kimchi is also another kimchi that I tried of my neighbor. She made cucumber. I've tried her cucumber kimchi or radish kimchi, and then just her standard kimchi. Oh, they were all good. So yeah, you can just take all the same basic ingredients and then use whatever you got in your garden that you think would taste good in kimchi. And that's kind of the fun of it too, is you can be a little bit creative and throw different types of vegetables in there. Now, I'm going to say right after that, one of the things, because that's what I'm doing right now, that I've got so many eggs coming in. Okay, well, I've got all these eggs, and I might as well go ahead and dehydrate up a bunch and then start hard boiling them so I can ferment them, because it's one of my favorite ways to eat eggs and to get that selenium and that protein source is fermented hard-boiled eggs. I love them. Started doing it several years ago. I never watched anybody's video. I don't even know if anybody else has videos on fermenting hard-boiled eggs. I'm sure there's people doing pickled eggs like with vinegar, but I actually ferment them the same way I ferment anything else using my fermentation starter. Instead of like with the kimchi, I don't use a salt brine. I add salt to it. I don't use a salt brine. There's a big difference. I use the fermentation starter, which means that I make myself, which I have videos on. The video with the newest one is the most thorough. I did maybe 2 years ago. Even though I'd been making kimchi the traditional salt brine way for years, I'd learned about making a ginger bug and using that to make mead. And then I thought, I wonder how this would work for getting vegetables fermented, like make kimchi. So I started doing it that way and I loved it. It speeds up the process because it gets it going faster. And then of course, you could still let it sit for a couple of weeks if you wanted it to become really tart, but that way you don't have to worry about adding so much salt, because using the salt, too much salt can prevent it from fermenting, and then it'll turn to slime. It'll just rot and it's gross. I had that happen to me before. You got to have enough salt to it helps keep it from spoiling. Okay. But with the fermentation starter, because the fermentation process starts right away, you just don't need that much salt and it's not going to spoil. I've never had one spoil on me doing it this way. And so with that, I started using that fermentation starter to do all kinds of things, to ferment many different things. So the eggs then became one of them. So now here's the next thing I did. So I was like, man, I'm kind of in the mood. I should make some kimchi. I also really want to ferment some eggs. And then I'm like, ooh, maybe I should make some kimchi eggs. So basically, do my fermented eggs. Instead of doing the rosemary, garlic, and hot pepper eggs, how about do like kimchi eggs? So I use the ginger, the garlic, green onions from the garden. Of course, I still add salt. I actually, to this one, instead of using cayenne pepper, I use my own hot pepper powder from my Chinese 5-color pepper. Oh my goodness. And then I still throw some red pepper flakes in there because I like the look of the red pepper flakes in anything like that. I also added the anchovy, the fish sauce to it. And boy, those turned out really good. Really good. I am so pleased with those. And so I'm definitely doing those again. The flavor of them turned out exactly how I had kind of had envisioned in my head. And if you've never tried fermenting hard-boiled eggs, so it's not the same as pickled eggs where they use vinegar, because they're not, in fact, I don't know if I've ever had a pickled egg, but those are going to be sour. These aren't sour. They taste like a hard-boiled egg with just a little bit of kick to it. They kind of got a little bit of fizziness to them because they're fermented. And then whatever spices you throw into the water, the liquid that you're fermenting the eggs in, the eggs are going to take on some of that flavor. And most of it obviously is going to go into the white part of the egg. And some people talk about poking holes in the eggs so that the fermentation gets into, and the spices, all that, get into the yolk, but that's not really the best idea, because what will happen then is as they ferment, the yolk will start to liquefy and start oozing out the holes. And just depending on how long you let it sit. And then I noticed somebody had mentioned beet kvass. I've done that before. That's something I like on occasion, but I wouldn't say it was my favorite thing to do. But if you make a beet kvass, you can also ferment your eggs in the beet kvass. That's also very good, and also makes a very beautiful egg because it turns the yolk purple, or it turns the white purple, and sometimes that purple even seeps into the yolk a little bit, so you'll kind of have this variegated color. They're really pretty and they taste great. One of my other favorite things to do now, I did it years ago and then forgot about it, and then did it again, started doing it again, and decided to do more last year after I did a small batch. I'm like, I forgot how much I liked these. And that was fermenting snow peas. Now, fermenting snow peas can be You can do it with the garlic, onion, and red pepper if you want, or you could just do it with a little salt or any kind of spices you want to add to it. Fermented snow peas are really good. They tend to stay crisper longer than they do in the freezer for a little while, at least for up to the first year. And then if you let them sit for a little longer, well, I won't say year, at least 6 to 8 months in there, they can stay pretty crisp, especially if you throw in a horseradish leaf. A horseradish leaf is great. I do the same thing with the cucumber kimchi. And I find horseradish leaves work better than grape leaves at keeping things crisp. And they add this nice flavor to it. And it's not overpowering because it's a leaf. You still get that horseradish flavor, but it's more mild. But anyway, I just really, really liked them like that as a snack, but also as using through the year, adding to different stir fries and whatnot. However, I forgot about them, that there was just a little bit left in a jar, and I kept forgetting they were in the fridge. And when I went to use them, by that point, they were close to a year. So in that case, freezing them will last longer. But as soon as you freeze them, they lose a lot of their crispness. But freezing them raw, do not blanch them, will help them hold that crispness better. If you blanch them, they'll turn to mush. Even if, no matter how carefully you time it and put them immediately in ice water and then freeze them, no, they're gross. I did that one year with a whole bunch of them thinking I was doing a good thing, and they were gross. We just really didn't like them. But the fermenting them is both good for using throughout the year, as long as you use them within that first year and add that horseradish leaf or at least grape leaf to the jar. But what I'm going to do from now on is make sure I work through the fermented ones immediately. I mean, you work through those first and then have ones in the freezer, which I still have a bunch in the freezer from last year, and then use those in my stir fries like I normally was doing. So kimchi was the first thing I ever fermented. The second thing I ever got into fermenting was making homemade mead. And if you don't know what mead is, it's wine made with honey and water, and then some kind of starter. Some people will use a wine yeast. I've always just used whatever fermentation starter I have, which in the beginning was the ginger bug, until I decided to start getting experimental and trying, because ginger, getting a good organic ginger around here was super expensive if you could get it at all. And I thought, why don't I try it? Can I get a starter going from something other than ginger? So I just started experimenting with all kinds of different things. And it didn't matter what I used. It didn't matter if it was fruit peels, whole pieces of fruit, herbs from the garden like dandelion, red clover, etc. I could always get a fermentation starter going. So I always have 3. The 3 I have right now, and I keep them in the fridge. Once they're good and bubbly, I keep them in the fridge and I cycle through them so they're always alive. The number one thing now I use my fermentation starter for, though, is making the bread. So all of my yeast breads get made with my fermentation starter. So basically, I'm fermenting my bread just in a little bit different way than the normal sourdough that most people are going to get into when they're trying to get away from having to depend on store-bought yeast. Well, mine is my fermentation starter, and I'll use a different one each time. But anyway, honey wine or mead is a really great place to get started, especially if you have bees and you have a lot of honey. And I've never had bees, but I was buying honey in bulk. Back then, it was mostly, I was getting it from Glory Bee. But anyway, it takes 3 cups of honey to make a gallon of wine. So 3 cups of honey. And then if you're using like a starter like I do, you're going to add a cup of that. And then the rest, you top it off with your water. So you're going to have about 3 quarts of water, and then you'll have your gallon. And what I always did, though, was made 1 to 2 cups of the water would be some kind of fruit. And sometimes I would just blend it up and put it in there. Sometimes it was going ahead and filling the jug all the way up and then putting in chunks of stuff like when I'd made the cinnamon or the orange spice mead, I would throw in a few cloves, a couple of cinnamon sticks, and then some orange pieces, slices. Just put the whole slices in there. And that usually turned out super good. There's more work involved in making a wine if you're pressing your own fruit. Now, I know some people do steam juicing. I don't have one of those. I don't care to have one of those. I hand press my grapes. I've made wine using juice that's been like that I'd canned from my grapes, and it wasn't near as good as the wine I made from the fresh juice. Well, I froze the grapes, but then I hand press them out because it's easier that way. So it's not super fresh, but it's not the same as cooked. And it just, to me, they have a better flavor. Kimchi, eggs, snow peas, and then juice in the form of also not just wine, but soda. We don't really drink wine. I mean, we'll have a glass once in a rare occasion, but it's more used for other things. And then, but if I just want a fizzy drink, then I'll ferment some kind of juice, whatever, whether it be from something I've juiced myself or juice that I've purchased, just ferment it for a few days with a little starter in there, because usually that juice has been cooked in some way, especially if you bought it and it's not raw. So you're going to have to add a starter to get it going. I've done that with lemonade even, and my own apple juice from my own trees. And then you got your own sparkling cider. It's pretty good. It's pretty tasty. And then one of the last ones I made was the honeysuckle soda, just throwing the honeysuckle flowers into some water with a little sugar so it can ferment good, right? And then my starter, and then made a little soda out of it. It was pretty yummy. Now, as far as some other things that I have fermented in the past that I will still do now and then, but they're not my favorite things to do anymore, and that is fermenting garlic or chopped onions. Now, the nice thing about it is a good way that you can keep them raw and then have them be preserved. I still store all my ferments in the fridge. Ferments really should be stored in some kind of cool place. It can be a cold basement, a root cellar, but we don't have those. I will do that with some things, like if I have a lot, but I find with garlic, I like to freeze it. So even though I grow garlic, I always end up buying the raw peeled garlic from Azure Standard and just throw it in the freezer. And it is so easy to use because you just pull out the pieces and it starts thawing out within seconds. And I mean, you could pull it straight out of the freezer and start cutting it. But if you wait like a minute, it's really easy to cut. Just chop it up. And the reason I prefer that over fermenting is that one thing about fermenting onions and garlic is it takes that bite out of them. Now, some people might prefer that if onions and garlic are typically too strong for you. With us liking garlic, I don't like the fact that it takes a lot of that strong garlic flavor or onion flavor out. So it's not my favorite way. If I didn't have a way to freeze, then yes, I do that if I need to put up a lot of garlic and I wanted it ready to use. And that is the nice thing about it, is you can just pull it out of the jar, chop it up, and add it to whatever. And it works great. You just might want to add extra if you want to get plenty of garlic flavor, and same with the onion. And I've done pickles, fermented cucumbers as pickles, not as a kimchi, where I, sliced them and then just fermented them and just put maybe a little bit of flavors, like maybe a little garlic, onion, but not try to make them taste like kimchi. And that's good too. But now it's like, if I'm going to ferment cucumbers, I'm going to make cucumber kimchi. Just like if I'm thinking of making sauerkraut, well, I'm just going to make kimchi. I like those strong flavors. So, and then another one I tried was green tomato pickles. Now, it was okay. I did a bunch of them too, and it took me a long time to work with them, to work through them, sorry. But you can make green tomato pickles, and mine was in the form of fermenting them rather than, using the vinegar and letting them sit in that, but that'd be one way to do it. But you can try that. I don't know. They were just okay. I didn't hate them, but I didn't love them. So I find other things I'd rather do with green tomatoes than that. But I have tried that. And there's a few other things I fermented over the years. One I forgot to write down is this would go along with the fermented juice to make kind of a soda, is making a fermented smoothie. So instead of using juice, you just blend up your fruit, make a smoothie out of it, and then add your starter and ferment it for a few days. And now you've got a fizzy smoothie. And I've done this with what's the one I did? I got some guavas one time. I was like, I'm never seeing guavas in the store. So I bought some guavas and I thought, I'm gonna turn some of this into a smoothie and ferment it. And that was pretty good. Love you all. Thanks for coming in as always. Take care and God bless.